Welcome to Hospice Explained. This podcast is intended as an educational aid and is only a resource to begin to understand the end-of-life season. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please always seek advice from your physician or qualified members of your healthcare team with any questions regarding a medical condition.
Welcome to Hospice Explained. I'm your host, Marie Betcher. Tonight I have my guest is Leanne Pepper. Leanne is also a fellow podcaster. Leanne's podcast is called Class Reunion, the podcast that helps you avoid all those awkward and weird feelings about going to your own high school reunion. Welcome, Leanne.
How are you, Marie?
I'm good, thanks. So, Leanne, you're going to talk to me about a couple experiences with hospice.
Yes. And, it was interesting when, we both connected because I do have two entirely different experiences. And one would be with my mother, which we can go through first, and the other would be with my father.
Okay.
And where I think it's just unique is no hospice experience is the same, but they're both wonderful in their own way. You just have to be prepared for how it all unfolds.
Absolutely.
So, would you like me to start with my mom?
Yeah, whichever one you're comfortable with.
So the irony was, and I think I heard this from you in a previous podcast that you shared, it was my father who had all of the medical issues, right? He's had double bypass, he's had heart issues, high cholesterol. We always thought that would be the order in which, my parents would pass, that it would be my dad first.
Yes, that was something I've said.
And right, I think that's what I heard. And so when you're blindsided by the reverse order, it can be jarring. So my mom was very healthy, very gregarious, funny lady. And she started to bruise quite a bit and went to the doctor, and she found out she had AML, acute myeloid leukemia. And it just spiraled very quickly. And we did everything that we could up until that point, but we just knew, she was tired. There were enough blood transfusions every week. The chemo wasn't working. And when we finally did get into Florida Cancer Institute, so we were based in Florida, they really basically said there was nothing they could do. So I think at that point she said, I'm done. I still have her voicemail saved from the last night that she was there, where she said, I'm just going to get some rest and I'm ready to come home. And that's when the process began. So we knew that she had agreed to, fully understood, she was 76, fully understood that she was traveling home to have in-home hospice.
Okay.
So that is where our adventure began. And I think I do want to touch upon how fantastic hospice is from the preparation beginning to end, right? It's a different consult that takes place. There's a level of compassion that is unlike the hospital setting. And no offense to the hospital setting. It's just that, you're in a bed and they hopefully want you to get better and turn that over. This is a different relationship that's one-on-one that engages the whole family and prepares you for what lies ahead. So I'll pause there first and see if there's anything you want me to address before I move on.
No, I think you're nailing it. Absolutely.
And so in her case, and I always tell people when their family members go into hospice, my comment is be prepared for the privilege. I know that sounds strange, but many people get a phone call and, people pass under a variety of circumstances. And if you can go through the hospice situation and be by your family or loved one's side, it's a privilege. It's awful. It's heartbreaking, but I feel that program allows you to have so much closure to what's happening with your loved one. So my mom was in a very good spiritual place, which did help. She was very prepared and comforted by her own decision. And it allowed us time to have, people from her neighborhood come over. They all surprised her in the lanai one time because she was in the bedroom. We did a bed in the living room, and we opened up the curtains, and all of her friends from golf were there with "We Love Kathy" t-shirts and sang. And so it was quite beautiful every day to have somebody come by and have those words one-on-one that you would love to hear. But oftentimes we hear that at the funeral, right? We talk about loved ones at a funeral. So to be able to have that time one-on-one with friends and family and have those words be spoken to her, I know meant the world to her. I was fortunate that she was very cognizant during that time, but that can be good and bad, you know?
Right.
And when she was declining, which was pretty quickly, she was bleeding internally. This is where I learned about hospice, and it's important to note, but it's hard at first to figure that out because obviously a lot of people's parents or loved ones are in the hospital with an illness, and so you're used to finding a solution, you're used to finding a cure or some other remedy. And when she was in pain and having situations happen, it was weird for me to transition to, we're not looking to solve this issue. We're looking to comfort the patient.
Right.
Because at this point, it's life ending, right? And so that's a mind switch that I don't know if you knew that right off the, bat when you started with hospice or your family members, but that little switch is something that's super important, that you are there to make them comfortable and not put any more medication into the body that's going to change the outcome, because it won't.
So, like a statin drug is a common
Yes.
example. The statins
Mhm.
aren't going to change the outcome.
Right.
And they're for cholesterol medicine. Yeah, exactly.
Right, right. I mean, they took her off of everything, and so that was interesting. But the other thing I think I've heard you touch upon was, we were there, and I was there daily. My father was there at the time, and the hospice nurse was checking in, or the team, I should say. And I was like, I didn't know how close and attached to the situation they were supposed to be. And I had this lovely gentleman come in, and he said, "Look, we will be here when the time comes, but you are so engaged in the care of your mother. And, this is something about Florida that people need to also consider. Not everybody's here. There's a lot of elderly people that are here without their family." And he said, "I need to be where I know I need to be. And you are here knowing we're a phone call away and engaged and taking such great care of her." So I realized that that's why they weren't there every day, or, coming on site every day, because I was able to, and it made my heart ache for those that were alone during that process. Like, it made me think about everybody in Florida that was, going through he had 15 patients. And of those 15, I was the only one that was a family member available.
Wow.
It's sad, isn't it?
It's sad. And in fact, a recent episode, actually number 85, Jamie Haberman. Jamie does Hospice Buddy out of Florida, and she mentioned that exact problem to me. She said,
Mm-hmm.
so many are transplants. And I would imagine Arizona on the West Coast is similar.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The transplants. So they moved, and then they're facing end of life without their loved ones that are close. And some people aren't able to go
Yes. Yes.
to be with their loved ones. They just can't afford it. They don't know how bad it is because they don't see them. So much to that.
Right, right. So at the very end, though, I will say what impressed me the most was making sure I was comfortable as things were progressing to, the last couple of days. And they were certainly there 24 hours. So now I can't, I call it the origami method. I will never get over the care and the ability that people have to make people comfortable and flip the sheets and turn them over. And, I just was fascinated because I wasn't able to do that. I did most of it up until that point, but where she was immobile at the end, that was hard for me to know how to do anything. And when they came in, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, the sheets were changed. She was bathed. She was
Yeah.
made into a comfortable burrito. And the whole time, this particular nurse just whispered in her ear, telling her everything that she was doing and making sure she understood that, "I'm turning you to the right. I'm just going to turn you over this way. You're doing great." And I thought, wow, this is the most peaceful, beautiful thing I've witnessed. It took out all of my insecurity about what was about to happen, because the care and the love that was given to her was something I'd never seen to that level. It was beautiful.
Nice. How many days? Was it days, weeks that your mom was?
It was like a week.
All right.
It was pretty quick. Yeah. Yeah. So that was just, that was beautiful. And also that was in 2013. So conversely, my father lived 7 years after that alone, which is always interesting when you get to know your parents separately when there isn't this spouse, right? Or
Yes, it is different.
the mother mother of the family is gone and he's left to communicate with his 4 children, adult children on a different level. And he was very stoic and very business-like, and his experience was much different. And you couple that with COVID, and it was all during 2020.
Ugh. Sorry.
Yes, I know. And so that's why I was really wanting to share with you that every experience, I think I know what's going to happen, right? But the process and the situation was vastly different. And that was quite an adjustment because it was, very hands off. So he was in an assisted living and he had Parkinson's. And that too took him very quickly from diagnosis to the end.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah, it's not common. In his case, I think he probably had it a lot sooner, but did a very good job of masking it.
Sure. Oh, I believe that.
We all have that shuffle. Yeah, right. That shuffle, you can attribute it to just being older or whatever, but remember, he's a very proud man. So unlike my mother who was prepared to go, he was not. And think about all the adjustments. He had to sell his home, he had to go to assisted living. He couldn't see people because we weren't allowed in the facility.
Mm.
Right. And I just think that was the perfect storm to escalate everything. And I couldn't even gauge how he was because we weren't allowed in. It was a lot of relying on staff, which did a good job, but still, it's not the same at all.
No, it's so different. You need to have eyes on.
Yes. Yes. And there was a lot of debate whether we would be able to be a part of his passing or not.
Mm.
And I don't know if that is something that you experienced over COVID, but, and because I know the rules and regulations changed dramatically.
I had a loved one die in 2020, but, he didn't have COVID and he wasn't in a facility by any means.
Mm-hmm.
And he died during that whole season and, we could visit as, he and his spouse and family, everybody has to have checks and balances, but I felt like we had plenty of visits considering the whole thing, considering 2020.
Yeah, right.
Also, 2020, my husband had a beloved family member died about 6 weeks prior to my brother. And so I'd been really busy, literally teaching hospice to loved ones and being available. And my sweet little doggie just kind of fell apart a couple days after my brother died. And
Mm.
so I took her to the emergency vet and I had to sit outside. They came and took her inside and then called you on the phone and said, this is wrong with your dog and she needs to go to heaven today.
Oh
And it's
my
like,
gosh.
still I'm like so mad at myself for not recognizing. And I said, wait a minute, she really wasn't doing this bad. And they said she probably just, as you're talking about your dad, she kind of fell apart,
Yeah,
quickly.
right.
And so I said, uh, uh, you know, literally, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to be alone. And I need to come in and be with her. And they're like, well, we're going to let you come in and, we'll let you have one other person. Well, my husband and my youngest were very local nearby. They were doing something. And I said, can you come quickly? Honey's going to go to heaven. And they did. They dropped everything and came and they let all three of us come in. So this was September of 2020. They let all three of us literally, put our masks on and run in the vet to the left door. Couldn't look right or left. But they gave us our time and shut the door and
Well, appreciate that so much because you understand that time period.
it was terrible.
Because that's another reason why I wanted to come on was like, listen, I've experienced it twice and two different experiences just due to life, right? And
Yes.
that was a crazy, crazy time.
Yes. It was awful. So I apologize for really diverting the story, but yes, I understand.
No, I feel that you can relate.
Well, so your dad is declining rapidly. You don't even know if you can see him. Take it back up to your story.
Yeah. And if you recall too, it was always, you have to test negative. So we were always doing the COVID tests.
Okay.
And it was my brother was also down in Florida as well. So that was nice that I had his support. And, we would take the test and we'd be negative, and then they'd say, nope, you can't come in. Another week would go by. And again, we still are going by reports on the phone,
Oh.
right? There was nothing for us to really tangibly see. I did, have conversation with his primary physician, but he too didn't go in the facility that often because he too was protecting himself and, was trying to maintain his physician list, patient list that he had. It just was, I understood everyone's reason. It was just such a different, we really thought we were prepared for it because we had done it with my mom, but it really challenged my brother and I to just like step back and go, this is going to be an entirely different experience. And we have to be prepared. We may not be present.
Mm.
So finally, they did see it declining. And he was, I don't know, 80 pounds dripping wet at this point. He was really small. And that shocked us because we hadn't seen that weight loss. And so they did allow us to come in our hazmat suits, as I call it. You can know, right? The whole
Mhm.
white jumpsuit that doesn't breathe very
Yep.
well, and the shield, and rightfully so. I'm not criticizing that, but it was different, right?
Right.
And we're in the room, and he is mad as a hornet. So that was where the shock and contrast was. He was not prepared mentally. And I think you said your mom was, or maybe one of your guests said their mom was stubborn. That was my dad. He was extremely upset that this was happening. And you could see the fear on his face.
Mm.
And so we had to adjust and make sure he felt comfortable because he just wasn't ready. And yet there was just the shell of a man. So it was different for him to fight it so much. And we were there all day, and hospice was wonderful, of course, but they just assumed that he was in a peaceful state. And my brother and I kept saying, "You don't know our father." And that's the other thing too, is when you're coming into it under those circumstances, you don't communicate with the family that much to have them put those notes together and build that persona of who this patient is.
Right.
And they were convinced that he was labored breathing and it was going to be soon. And we are sweating. We're dripping sweat in our eyes under these masks. I can kind of joke about it now just because
Mm.
you obviously
Yeah.
understand.
No, they were terrible.
And we're like, listen, we've been here for almost 24 hours. We need to eat, we need to breathe. And they said, sure, go grab some lunch. I think you have some time. Well, it was 2 days later. We were there so many days. And finally, I was just like, I don't know how this is going to go down because he was not getting comfortable. And I wanted to ask you, so this is another reason why I wanted to have this open dialogue. By law, it seems to be the increase in morphine has to be like state regulated or approved, or he wasn't settling down with the dosage and they weren't upping it as quickly as we would have hoped for based off of, hospice rules and regulations. So can you maybe share if that's true, not true, or what we were experiencing that time?
So that's a great comment.
Mm-hmm.
How does every facility and how does every person interpret?
Okay.
So not everybody interprets everything the same, and what a family thinks is pain and what a family thinks is how much you should give them. Let's dive into it though. But here's what I my gut level is he didn't want to die. He had some issues, and morphine really can help for pain and shortness of breath. But I would bet your dad needed something for restlessness, anxiety, and
Yes. Yes.
that's not morphine. So that's a lorazepam type Ativan Valium style medication.
Yes. Yes.
Something to really take that edge off and dial them down a little bit. I probably think,
Mm-hmm.
and again, this is just me hearing it for the first time, but just that gut level is he probably needed something to relax.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Yeah. And did they give him anything?
No, and that's what crushed us, which is why I say it's two different experiences because my mother was such a beautiful, peaceful, and this goes back to where I was saying it is hard. The nurses were very busy, right?
Right.
This and the ability to really have us explain who our father was or, his personality could get lost because they were so inundated with being everywhere and nowhere at the same time, right? It was a lot. They were short staffed as well. And you understood. I mean, it was a terrible time.
People were sick. Staff could have been sick. They could have had staff calling out or quitting because of fear of getting it, fear of working with it.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
Fear is a rough driver, but
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just really to share
Yeah,
what a different time.
it was. It was.
What a different time and what a different experience, and still beautiful, still, doing the best that they could. But that's what I wanted to ask you because we didn't understand how we could have made it any better. We wanted him to have the same level of peace that she did, and that was our only regret.
Here's my question. So you said they didn't give anything but morphine. You wanted them to increase the morphine, but they never gave anything else?
No.
That's too bad. You're bringing up some of the best questions, honestly. It's really good for people to think about, every situation is just not the same.
Yes. No. And every person's not the same.
Every situation. No, they're not. That's like episode number 1 for me. I was just doing the transcript and I was like, literally, that's what I said. Every person is not the same. Every patient, every place, every facility, every state,
Mhm.
everything is different.
Mhm.
A county,
Mhm.
you know, you can die in the busiest county or the slowest county as far as staffing. And, if you live far away from everybody, it takes 2 hours each way. Well, you're still going to have some slowdowns to get people to
Right.
you. Hospice was involved.
Yes, they took over his care at the end. It wasn't the
Okay.
assisted living at that point because he was legally under hospice care.
Did they have like an assisted living? Did they switch him or was it still the assisted living staff with hospice playing the support role?
They were there every day. It was a 24-hour
Okay.
shift. Yeah, so they
Wow.
took over completely. Yeah.
And that's not even common either. So,
Oh,
dear audience, listen, that is not always the case either. That does happen, but it's not always and forever too. So that actually is super nice to have if you can get somebody in for 24 hours.
there was a process to approve him for that, and I think it was because honestly, Maria, it was about 3 days. It wasn't very long. So they must have
Okay.
also noted that was going to be the case.
Yeah.
I just think we weren't dialed in
Okay.
because I'll say this for my brother and I too. Our emotional state was different, right, than with my mother. So we were processing what we knew of him and didn't convey it well enough that it was true anxiety. We joked that he's stubborn, he doesn't want to die, those type of things. But the reality was that's the truth. He was scared to death. And maybe there was just a different way we could have communicated that to make it a real issue.
Well, I think what you're bringing up is perfect because no matter what, this is in the past. And my goal as a podcaster and your goal is to make things better for the future. So my hope is that
Mhm.
somebody can listen to this episode and say, "I think that's what mom or my dad or my loved one is doing.
Right.
They're not having pain, they're having anxiety and they need something for that." And
Yes.
or they need the spiritual counselors, the pastoral staff
Yes.
to come in and talk to them. They don't have to push religion. That is never the case. But they get to
No.
discuss what is it that's making you afraid. So your dad might have needed some spiritual care and
Yep.
so it's not always just about medication, of course. So it can be something of having a conversation. And again, you're talking about a situation where you weren't even being able to get out the information to say, "Hey, dad's not who dad is." And,
Right.
how could you don't expect that of yourself. I want to just look back and you got to forgive yourself too. You didn't do anything wrong. You can always look back and say, "I could have done this better."
Yeah.
We can look back and we can talk about it and we can say, "Let's see here. We can improve this," right?
Right. Right. And the year has everything to do with,
Oh, yes.
a lot of the
Oh, my
outcome,
goodness.
right? So, and that's where I look back at my mom's situation with such fondness is the wrong word, but I mentioned it before, privilege, because it was just a different experience for her. And she was very faith based and she felt very comfortable of where she was going and voiced it many times. So, anyway, the point of me sharing both of them was really to say just prepare that each person's different and the circumstances of where they are is different
Right.
and go with it
Yeah.
and really communicate with your hospice team to make it, just a beautiful experience because it really is. We're privileged to have hospice. And I don't know what people did beforehand. I really don't.
We transitioned towards hospital care, and I think that transitioned our society away from being as familiar with illnesses and end of life. It's probably the best way I can say it.
Well, it's a beautiful program. Well, it did open my eyes, and I don't know what I will do late in life for volunteering, but boy, it's a very lonely population down here. And I was made very well aware of it during this situation. So if there's anything I've walked away from, is how do I pay that forward and be there for somebody else?
That's a beautiful comment. And the patients love it because when they go on to hospice, now some of the folks, they're on it for a few months. So they have time to get a volunteer that can go in every week. And they try to fit, patients and volunteers with people that have like interests and things like that. Leanne, I was just thinking everybody is different on how they approach it, how they receive it, how they accept it,
Yeah.
how you receive it, how you accept it. It sounds like you and your brother were accepting for your dad's situation and your mom's. It's just the outcomes were the same, but how you got there wasn't the same.
Yes. Yes. Right.
And so your thoughts are to improve your mom. It sounded like there really was nothing we could improve upon
Right.
as providers for hospice. But for your dad, it's really to why was he not comfortable and what could we have done better for him? And maybe it was reach out and talk about anxiety, talk about spiritual needs. Really good examples of experiences you had. Leanne, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marie. It's a pleasure to speak with you tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on Hospice Explained. Think about ways you can make a difference in someone's life. Also, please subscribe and share this podcast with anyone who would benefit from listening. Thank you.